Okay, so we will encounter both neuroscience, psychology, and ethology, and for this video we will concentrate on neuroscience. So, in principle, everybody knows everything about neurons, how they look like, and how they work. And what's quite special about those neurons for us as computer scientists is that they not work with bits, but that you see trains of potential differences fired all over the whole axion. So it is a completely different way of sending information from one neuron to another. But all those things are in principle electronic. So if you put such a sensors inside the body of a person, then in principle you can measure those signals, and you can try to use those signals and interpret those signals. So that's done quite actively, and some of our first cyborgs actively use that to control a robot. Kevin Warwick is the professor from England that claims that he's the first cyborg, and he not only made himself a cyborg but also his wife. So by thinking on his wife, she could feel it. But you can not only do it by putting sensors inside your body, but you can also use visual clues. Most of our sensory information comes from our eyes. We see that as the most important sensor. And by putting eye trackers on persons, you can really see what they're doing. You can do experiments with the hand and visual control, and there you see how the persons, for instance, pick something up, and you can learn how that should be done and use that same strategy for your robot. And what they found out for that sort of experiments, that not everything that happens during a pickup is purely feedback control, but there are a lot of predictive behaviors in it. You have predictions where you think an object would be, and where, if you control your hand, where it should go. And once you have executed that action, then with some final corrections, you make the last approach. So there's a lot of happening in the brain, and that's not only understanding what happens, but also making a prediction about the future, what could happen, and thinking of possible futures. And what we see is, for that sort of predictions, you need a large brain. So there are a lot of structures. The first animals that were studied were the really simple ones, where the number of neurons is limited to only 22. And depending on how advanced the brain is, you can grow that to much bigger brains. And actually, the humans don't have the biggest brain, but what we have, as we see, we have a lot of connections in it. So, if you look at the human brain, then typically it has 10 to the 9th, 10 to the 10 number of neurons in it. If you compare that with the number of transistors on a modern computer, that is not actually that much. And Also, the processing speed is quite low, only 1 gigahertz, and say modern computers can already outperform that. What's the big difference is the connectivity. You have many of the neurons have connections with at least 1,000 other neurons, and they also make connection with 1,000 other neurons. So that's completely different in how our modern computer works. For sure, if you go to visual input, there you see that the number of inputs that's coming from retina is nearly 1 million. But still, the brain is able to think about what you see, so the sort of objects that you get, the indexing what you see in 100 milliseconds. And it means that in less than 100 steps from one neuron to the other, they already get a full association about what you see. And we can learn from that. It gives a clear clue how the brain actually works. And what you see is that the brain really makes use of all those connectivity. In principle, you make only 100 steps through the network, but the network is fully connected, and all those 100 neurons that were involved were also all 100 activated. So you're living more or less in a hypercube. And that's not completely all-to-all, but what you see if you're zooming in how precisely all the neurons that are active in insect vision is that you really can see structures in the processing in different clusters. And that's only in the cortex to interpret what you see. But if you go to the full body, then you see that again, also inside the body, you have a lot of even bigger structures and nerve pathways. So although you have really a lot of pathways, you also have a lot of structure. Now, what's nice of the recent developments in artificial intelligence, where you have the deep learning, is that the big difference with networks that were before is that you have much more structure than before. Previously, you had just a simple stem, and all the layers were more or less the same size. But now you can see that internally a lot of structure is built up. I don't say that's precisely the structure as you can see in the brain or in the cortex, but structuring your network really helps to get better answers from your network. So in that sense, the deep network are really now bio-inspired, with adding more and more structure to their architectures. Okay, that is what I wanted to tell about the first part, and we will continue with psychology in the next clip.